The crowd fell silent. The music stopped mid-note, and every eye turned toward the black limousine pulling up to the gates. Out stepped Maya Thompson, the woman Darius once loved and left behind when she had nothing. He thought she'd stay broken. He thought she'd never rise again. But tonight, under the soft glow of wedding lights, she's back. Not to beg, not to cry, but to remind him of everything he threw away. Because this isn't a story about heartbreak. It's a story about rebirth, about how a woman can turn her deepest pain into her greatest power. So before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And hit that subscribe button, because this story will leave you speechless. I still remember the day the silence between Darius Coleman and me became louder than our words. It started with small things. Forgotten dinners, short tempers, empty apologies. But over time, those small things built a wall so high that even our laughter couldn't climb over it. He used to tell me I was his home. Then one morning, he said he felt trapped in it. Back then, we were living in a tiny apartment on the east side of Atlanta, the kind where the pipes rattled every time you turned on the water. I was juggling 2 jobs, working mornings at a cafe downtown and nights at a local salon, trying to keep us afloat while he chased business ideas that never seemed to last. Every evening, I'd come home, hoping he'd look at me the way he used to, like I was his piece after the storm. But all I saw was blame. One night, after another argument about money, he said something I'll never forget. "You've become my burden, not my blessing." Those words bruised deeper than any slap could, because deep down, I still loved him. A week later, he packed his things and left. No explanation, no goodbye. Just an empty closet and a note that said, "I need to find happiness again." For months, I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong. I replayed every fight, every tear, until the questions turned into silence. Sometimes the hardest part of heartbreak isn't the pain itself. It's learning how to breathe without the person you once built your world around. There were nights I'd wake up reaching for him, only to find the cold side of the bed. Days when I'd force myself to smile at work, pretending everything was fine when inside, I was crumbling. I stopped looking in mirrors because I couldn't stand the woman staring back. She looked tired, defeated, and older than her years. My girls, Tasha and Imani, tried to help, but they didn't understand. They'd say things like, "Girl, you gotta let that man go," or "God's got someone better for you." But how do you let go of a life you built from scratch? How do you stop loving someone who still lives in your heartbeat? Bills piled up. I fell behind on rent. I had to sell my old Honda Civic just to keep food in the fridge. Some days, I walked miles to work in the Atlanta heat, crying quietly behind my sunglasses so no one would see. That kind of pain has no sound. It's quiet like a slow leak that drains you until there's nothing left. I stopped going to church on Auburn Avenue because I couldn't pray without crying. Every word felt like a plea that bounced off the ceiling and came right back unanswered. And still, deep down, I hoped he'd come back. I told myself maybe he just needed time. Maybe he'd remember the woman who believed in him when no one else did. He didn't. I found out he'd moved on through social media. A picture of him and a woman I'd never seen before, smiling like nothing in the world had ever hurt him. She looked polished, wealthy, effortless. The kind of woman who wore designer sandals just to get coffee. The caption read, "New beginnings." My stomach dropped. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that while I was learning to survive, he was learning to forget me. That night, I sat on the kitchen floor, scrolling through those photos until my phone battery died. Then I just sat there in the dark, whispering to myself, "You'll be okay." But I didn't believe it. Time moved strangely after that. Some days felt endless. Others disappeared without warning. I started writing letters I never sent. To him, to myself, to the woman I used to be. One morning, while cleaning out the closet, I found one of his old hoodies. That gray Morehouse sweatshirt he used to wear everywhere. It still smelled faintly of his cologne, Dior Sauvage. I pressed it to my face and sobbed until I couldn't breathe. That was the day I realized healing wasn't going to come from waiting for him to say sorry. It had to come from me, from deciding that the story of my life couldn't end with his absence. So I began small. I started walking around Piedmont Park in the mornings, not because I had anywhere to go, but because I needed to move. In some direction, any direction. I read again. I joined a women's support circle in Decatur. I volunteered at a local shelter on weekends. Slowly, I began to recognize my own voice again. It was quiet at first, shaky, but it was there. I'd look in the mirror and whisper, "You are still here. You are still enough." And for the first time, I started to believe it. Then one afternoon, I saw Darius again. It was at a grocery store in Midtown. He was holding hands with that same woman. They didn't see me at first. I wish they hadn't at all. But then his eyes met mine, and for a split second, I saw something flicker. Maybe guilt, maybe surprise. She smiled politely, not knowing who I was. He nodded awkwardly like we were strangers. And maybe, in that moment, we were. Because the man I loved no longer existed. He was just a memory wearing his face. I walked past them without a word, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I just felt empty, but free. That same night, sitting by my window, watching the city lights blur through tears, I made myself a promise. One day, I'll build a life so full that this chapter will only be a footnote. I didn't know how or when, but I knew I couldn't let heartbreak define me forever. So I started over, not all at once, but piece by piece. Starting over wasn't graceful. It was survival. It was waking up every morning with swollen eyes and whispering, "You're still here, Maya. Keep going." It was learning to eat alone without feeling empty, learning to smile, even when it wasn't real yet. After Darius left, I found a small apartment in East Atlanta. Nothing fancy, just 4 walls, a secondhand couch, and a small window that overlooked a gas station. But it was mine. The first night I moved in, I sat on the floor with takeout noodles and told myself, this is where your healing begins. It didn't happen overnight. Some days I was strong. Other days I broke down over memories. The way he used to laugh, or how he'd hold my hand in church. But slowly I started to find pieces of myself buried under the rubble of our marriage. I started writing again, journaling. Not about the pain, but about who I wanted to become. I went back to school for a business management course and picked up weekend shifts at a small marketing agency downtown. At first, it was just to pay the bills, but over time, I realized something. I was good at it. Really good. Every new project I worked on gave me back a little more confidence. And one day, my supervisor pulled me aside and said, "Maya, you ever thought about going full-time with this? You have something rare, vision." That night, I cried, because for the first time in years, someone saw value in me again. 6 months later, I applied for a position at Matthews & Co., one of the biggest marketing firms in Atlanta. I almost didn't. A voice in my head whispered, "You're not enough." But another voice, stronger, quieter, said, "Try." I sent in my resume, took a deep breath, and prayed. A week later, I got the call. "We'd love to have you on board, Mrs. Coleman." And that's when I met Jordan. He wasn't loud or arrogant like most men in power. He had this calm confidence, the kind that made everyone else in the room slow down when he spoke. The first time we met, I was in the elevator juggling folders when everything dropped to the floor. He bent down to help me pick them up and said with a warm smile, "You look like you're carrying too much. Maybe let someone help next time." I laughed, embarrassed, not realizing who he was, Jordan Matthews, the CEO. Over the next few months, I saw him around the office, polite, composed, always respectful. Sometimes he'd ask about my weekend or compliment my ideas during meetings. But there was something different about him. He didn't look through people. He looked at them, One night after a company charity event, I found myself standing beside him on the balcony overlooking the city lights. I remember saying, "It's strange. A few years ago I thought my story was over. Now I feel like I'm just starting to live again." He looked at me, really looked, and said, "Maybe some stories have to break before they can begin again." That line stayed with me for weeks. We started talking more after that. Coffee breaks turned into lunch. Lunch turned into long evening walks after work. He never rushed me, never pushed. He just showed up, steady, kind, patient. I told him about my past one night, about Darius, the betrayal, the heartbreak. He didn't pity me. He didn't judge. He just said softly, "What he threw away wasn't weakness, Maya. It was strength he didn't understand." That's the night I realized I was falling for him, not because he rescued me, but because he reminded me I didn't need rescuing. Months passed. I grew, emotionally, professionally, spiritually. Jordan became my peace, my anchor, my safe place. He believed in me so much that I started to believe in myself again. Then, one Sunday afternoon at a charity fundraiser for single mothers, he took my hand and said, "You taught me that love isn't about possession. It's about partnership. I want to spend the rest of my life showing up for you." He proposed right there. Nothing grand, nothing public, just us. And I said yes. Our wedding was small, intimate, and full of laughter. I walked down that aisle not as the woman who'd been left behind, but as the woman who finally found herself. For the first time in years, I was happy, truly happy, and I thought my past was finally behind me, until one morning, 2 years later, a familiar name landed on my desk, Darius Coleman, the same man who left me, now listed as the new vice president of one of our major client companies. And in that moment, I realized the universe wasn't done with our story just yet. When I saw his name on that client file, I thought it was a mistake. I stared at it for a full minute, tracing the letters like they might rearrange themselves into something else, something less familiar, less haunting. Darius Coleman, the name that used to be written beside mine on every bill, every letter, every dream. My first instinct was to close the file and pretend I never saw it. But the universe doesn't work that way. When it wants you to confront something, it will drag it right to your doorstep. Or, in my case, my desk at Matthews & Co., our firm had just signed a major deal with Harborline Tech, one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in the Southeast. They were preparing for a big product launch, and we were handling their entire rebranding campaign. It was a huge opportunity, the kind of account that could shift someone's career. And there it was, VP of Operations, Darius Coleman. For a moment, everything inside me went quiet. The office noise faded. The clicking of keyboards, the hum of conversations, gone. It was just me, my heartbeat, and a name I'd spent years trying to forget. I leaned back in my chair, took a slow breath, and whispered to myself, "You're not that woman anymore, Maya. You're not her." Still, my hands trembled as I opened the file again. His email signature was there, his photo in the company directory, older, sharper, more polished than the man I remembered. He had that same confident look, but now it was layered with something else. Maybe time, maybe regret. When Jordan came by my office later that afternoon, I quickly minimized the file. He leaned against the door frame, smiling like he always did. Soft, effortless, the kind of smile that made my chest unclench. "You look deep in thought," he said. "Big client stress?" I hesitated, then nodded. Something like that. He walked in and placed a coffee cup on my desk. My favorite blend, almond milk, 2 sugars. He always remembered. "Whatever it is," he said, "we'll figure it out." That's what I loved about him. He didn't need explanations. He trusted my silence as much as my words. But later that night, lying in bed beside him, I couldn't shake the thought. What would happen when Darius walked into my office again? Would I freeze? Would I crumble? Or would I finally stand tall in the life I'd built without him? The next morning, I wore my armor, a tailored navy suit, pearl earrings, and the calmest expression I could muster. Jordan kissed my forehead before I left and said, "Remember, grace doesn't mean weakness. It means strength under control." At 10:30 a.m., the Harbor Line team arrived. I heard the elevator ding and the sound of footsteps approaching the conference room, and then that voice, low, confident, too familiar. "Maya?" It felt like time folded in on itself. He looked almost the same, except life had carved new lines around his eyes. His once youthful arrogance had settled into something quieter. Still, seeing him made my chest tighten with memories I thought I'd buried. "Hello, Darius." My voice was steady. Thank God. He blinked, clearly thrown off. "Wow, it's been a long time." "It has," I said simply. "Please have a seat." For the next hour, I walked him and his team through our presentation, voice steady, mind sharp, heart pounding beneath it all. Every slide, every word, I could feel his gaze. Not flirtatious, not bitter, just searching. After the meeting, his team left, but he lingered. "You're doing well," he said. "Really well. Thank you. I always knew you were smart, but this," he gestured around the glass-walled office, "this is something else." There was a strange sincerity in his tone, the kind of admiration that comes too late. "People grow," I said quietly. "Sometimes pain is the best teacher." He nodded slowly, eyes softening. "I guess I was one of your lessons, huh?" "One of the hardest," I replied, standing, "but also one of the most necessary." For a moment, he just stood there, like he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. Then he smiled faintly, a shadow of the old Darius. "You look happy, Maya. Really happy." "I am." And as he turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. Not pride, not resentment, but realization that the woman he once broke was now standing taller than he'd ever seen her. That night, I sat with Jordan on our balcony, city lights flickering below us. I told him everything, the client, the meeting, the moment. He listened without interruption, his hand resting over mine. "You handled it with grace," he said simply. "That's what healing looks like." I looked at him, my heart full. "It's strange," I admitted. "I thought seeing him again would break me, but it didn't. It just reminded me how far I've come." Jordan smiled. "Closure doesn't always come in apologies. Sometimes it comes in peace." And as the night air wrapped around us, I realized something. I didn't hate Darius anymore. I didn't even pity him. I was free. Or at least, I thought I was, until a week later when a cream-colored envelope arrived on my desk. It was hand-delivered, no return address. Inside, in Darius's handwriting, were just 6 words. "I'd like to see you again." For days, that envelope sat untouched on my desk. I couldn't bring myself to open it again, though I must have read those 6 words 100 times. "I'd like to see you again." There was no context, no reason, no explanation, just a message from a ghost I'd already buried. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to tear it up and throw it away, but curiosity, that cruel, quiet thing, kept whispering. What could he possibly want? That Friday, Jordan noticed my silence over dinner. We were at our favorite rooftop restaurant, the kind with fairy lights strung across the ceiling and a live band playing soft jazz in the background. He reached across the table, brushing his thumb against my hand. "You've been quiet all week," he said gently. "What's going on?" I sighed, reaching into my bag and sliding the envelope toward him. He unfolded the letter, read it once, and looked back at me. "Darius?" I nodded. There was a long pause. Then he exhaled slowly. "Do you want to see him?" "No," I said quickly, too quickly. I just don't understand why he reached out. It's been years. Jordan leaned back, studying me. Not with jealousy or suspicion, but with the calm understanding that made me fall in love with him in the first place. Maybe he needs closure, he said softly. Or maybe he finally realized what he lost. Either way, that's not your burden anymore. I looked at him, my chest tightening. You're not upset? Maya, he said, smiling faintly, I don't compete with ghosts. I know where your heart lives. That night, when I got home, I placed the letter in a drawer and told myself I was done with it. But the universe, again, had other plans. 2 weeks later, I got another letter. This one wasn't from Darius directly. It came in a gold-trimmed envelope embossed with elegant cursive letters. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Darius Coleman and Alyssa James. For a second, I thought it was some sort of sick joke. I blinked, reading it again. Wedding. The man who once told me he wasn't ready for commitment, the man who left me because he needed space to find himself, was now getting married. And somehow I was on the guest list. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I sat there staring at the card, memories crashing in like waves. The nights I cried myself to sleep, the mornings I woke up hoping it had all been a nightmare, and now he wanted me to witness him promise forever to someone else? The audacity, the irony, the poetry of it all. I told Jordan about it that evening. He listened quietly, his brow furrowed in thought. You don't have to go, he said. You owe him nothing. I know, I whispered. But maybe I need to. Why? I thought about it for a long moment before replying. Because for years I thought he ruined me. Maybe seeing him like this, happy, moved on, maybe that's what will finally prove he didn't. Jordan was quiet for a moment, then nodded. Then we'll go together. I froze. What? You didn't think I'd let you go alone, did you? He said, smiling softly. Besides, I've never been to a wedding where the ex-wife shows up glowing. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time that day. The wedding was set in Charleston, South Carolina, at an elegant lakeside venue surrounded by white roses and tall oak trees draped in Spanish moss. When we arrived, heads turned. I wasn't sure if it was the sleek black gown I wore or the man beside me, Jordan, in a tailored suit that made every woman in the room glance twice. We walked hand in hand through the venue like peace and power had decided to take human form. And then I saw him, Darius, standing near the altar, looking every bit the part of a man starting a new life. He looked good, but not better than I remembered. Just different, older, calmer, maybe wiser. When his eyes found mine, he froze. For a split second, I saw it. The shock, the disbelief, the regret that flickered across his face. Jordan gave my hand a gentle squeeze. You okay? He whispered. Perfect, I replied. We took our seats near the back. The ceremony began. Vows, music, applause. Everything was beautiful. Perfect even, and yet every time I looked at Darius, I saw something off in his smile, a stiffness, a distraction, like he was haunted by the memory of someone sitting quietly in the crowd, someone who once knew every version of him. After the ceremony, guests mingled at the reception. Jordan and I walked toward the garden area where the lights glowed softly under the trees. That's when I heard him call my name. Maya. I turned. Darius was standing there, his tie slightly loosened, a look of disbelief still written all over his face. You actually came. You invited me, I said simply. He hesitated. I didn't think you would. Neither did I. He studied me for a moment, the way my posture didn't fold under his gaze anymore, the way confidence now wrapped around me like silk. You look incredible, he said softly. Thank you. Life's been kind. He gave a hollow chuckle. You seem happy. I am. I smiled. Genuinely. He nodded slowly, his expression softening. I wanted to apologize, Maya, for everything. I didn't realize how much I'd broken until I saw how whole you became without me. There it was, the apology I once prayed for, delivered years too late. And instead of anger, all I felt was peace. You don't have to apologize, I said. If you hadn't left, I might never have found myself. Or him. His eyes shifted toward Jordan, who had walked up beside me. The recognition hit him immediately. Wait, Darius said, his voice faltering. Jordan Matthews? As in, the CEO? Jordan extended a hand, calm and composed. Good to finally meet you, Darius. I've heard a lot about you. Darius blinked, completely thrown off. You two are married, I said, smiling. 2 years now. Silence. The kind that fills a space when pride meets reality. He forced a smile, but his eyes gave him away. Wow, guess life really turned the tables. It always does, I said quietly. Later that night, as Jordan and I drove back to our hotel, I looked out the window at the blur of city lights and whispered, that was closure. Jordan smiled, keeping his eyes on the road. No, he said. That was destiny reminding you how far you've come. And as the car sped down the quiet Charleston highway, I felt something inside me settle for the first time in years. Not because I'd won, but because I was finally free. Truly, deeply free. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to the sound of the ocean. Calm, unbothered, almost mocking how chaotic my life had felt just the day before. Sunlight spilled across the hotel room, painting the sheets in gold. I turned over and saw Jordan beside me, still asleep, his hand loosely resting on my waist. For a moment, I just stared at him, not out of need, but gratitude. There was something sacred about that silence. Not the heavy silence I used to share with Darius, but a peaceful one. The kind that fills you instead of draining you. I slipped out of bed and stepped onto the balcony. The ocean breeze kissed my face, warm and salty. I could hear seagulls in the distance, the muffled laughter of kids down by the water, and for the first time in a long time, I felt light, really light. I sipped my coffee slowly, staring out at the horizon, at that endless line where the sky kissed the sea, and for a second I whispered to myself, "You did it, Maya. You made it out." Because I had. I'd walked into that wedding yesterday not as the broken woman who begged her husband to love her, but as the woman who learned to love herself enough to never beg again. When Jordan woke up, he joined me outside, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. "You've been quiet," he murmured. "Just thinking," I said softly. "About him?" "About me," I corrected, "and how far I've come." He nodded, pressing a kiss to the side of my head. "You're incredible, you know that?" "No," I smiled. "I'm healed. There's a difference." He chuckled, then said something that stayed with me for days. "Healing doesn't make you softer, Maya. It makes you wiser about where you give your softness." And just like that, I realized I wasn't just healed, I was reborn. We stayed in Charleston for a few more days after the wedding. A quiet getaway we hadn't planned but ended up needing. We explored local art galleries, walked barefoot on the beach at night, and ate seafood by candlelight while jazz music drifted through the restaurant speakers. One night, while slow dancing under fairy lights, Jordan looked down at me and said, "You know, I've seen you in many forms, strong, scared, brave, uncertain, but tonight I see peace, and it's beautiful." I laughed softly. "Peace looks good on me, huh? It's made for you." That night I cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing I was finally safe in love. When we returned to Atlanta, life carried on, but I wasn't the same woman who left. I'd shed an old skin. Work at Matthews & Co. had become a source of joy instead of pressure. I'd just been promoted to director of strategy, something I never would have believed possible back when I was struggling to pay rent in that tiny East Atlanta apartment. My new office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline. Sometimes when I'd arrive early before the team came in, I'd just stand there, watching the sun rise over the city, remembering the nights I used to stand at my window, wondering how I'd ever make it out of the dark. Now I was the light. It was during one of those quiet mornings that the idea for the Phoenix Project was born, a mentorship initiative for women rebuilding after heartbreak, divorce, or loss. I didn't just want to make money anymore. I wanted to make meaning. Every Saturday, a group of us would meet at a small community center in downtown Atlanta, women from every background you could imagine. Some had been left after 20 years of marriage. Others were rebuilding after losing jobs or homes. We'd sit in a circle, no titles, no masks, no pretending, and just talk. Sometimes we cried. Sometimes we laughed until we couldn't breathe. But every week, we healed. One afternoon, a woman named Tasha shared her story. She'd been left with 3 kids and no support. As she spoke, her voice trembled. "I thought I was done," she said. "But seeing you, Mrs. Matthews, it gives me hope." Her words broke something open inside me. I leaned forward and said quietly, "Healing doesn't mean the past didn't happen. It means it no longer controls your future." The room fell silent. Then someone started clapping. One by one, they joined in, and for the first time, I realized what real impact felt like. Darius had once made me feel small. Now I was helping other women feel seen. That was the real victory. Months passed, and the Phoenix Project grew faster than I expected. Local media began covering our work. We partnered with shelters, counseling centers, even small businesses willing to offer job placements for women starting over. One day, while getting ready for a live radio interview about the project, my assistant walked into my office with a folder. "Maya, the new client list just came in. You're leading the Coleman Tech account." I froze for a second. The name felt like a ghost tapping my shoulder. Coleman Tech? Yes, their VP just signed the partnership deal this morning. Darius Coleman. I let out a slow breath and smiled faintly. "All right, schedule the meeting." And for the first time in years, I said his name without feeling pain. Just peace. The following week, the boardroom was full. Executives from Coleman Tech were seated across the long glass table. I stood at the head of it, poised, polished, prepared. Then the door opened, and there he was, Darius. The same man who once told me I was his burden, not his blessing. He froze when he saw me. His face flickered between disbelief and discomfort. I didn't flinch. I just smiled and said, "Good morning, Mr. Coleman. Let's begin." For the next 90 minutes, I presented strategy models, marketing projections, and revenue forecasts with the same clarity and confidence I'd once begged him to see in me. He said nothing. He just listened. When the presentation ended, everyone clapped, even his team. And in that moment, I saw it. The realization in his eyes. He had left me searching for happiness, and I had found it without him. After the meeting, he lingered as everyone filed out. "You've changed," he said finally. "I grew," I replied simply. He nodded, eyes heavy. "You've become everything I always wanted to be." "No," I said softly. "I became everything I was always meant to be." And with that, I picked up my folder, smiled politely, and walked away. That night, Jordan and I had dinner at our favorite restaurant, the same one where we first confessed our love years ago. As we toasted with glasses of wine, Jordan smiled. "So, Mrs. Matthews, how does it feel to stand face to face with your past and not tremble?" "It feels like peace," I said, smiling back. "It feels like closure." He nodded. "To closure," he said, raising his glass. "No," I corrected. "To beginnings." We laughed, and the sound blended into the soft hum of music and conversation around us. Ordinary moments that now felt extraordinary, because when you've been through enough storms, calm starts to feel like a miracle. Later that night, as I sat on our balcony overlooking the glittering city lights, I whispered to myself, "You made it, Maya." And for the first time in my life, I didn't have to convince myself to believe it. I already did. Success has a strange sound. It's not always loud. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums quietly beneath the surface of your life, like soft jazz playing in the background while the world keeps spinning. For me, that's what the Phoenix Project became, a melody of healing, empowerment, and second chances. What started as a small circle of women sharing stories over coffee and tears had grown into a nationwide movement. We were featured on Essence, invited to the Breakfast Club, and even partnered with a foundation that provided funding for single mothers returning to college. Everywhere I turned, women were rising from ashes, stronger, wiser, softer in spirit, but fierce in purpose. And each time someone said, "Maya, you changed my life," I always replied, "No, sis, you did that. I just reminded you that you could." One afternoon, I received an email that made me pause. It was from a publisher in New York, Sterling and Maynard Publishing. "We've followed your work, Mrs. Matthews," it read. "We believe your journey could inspire millions. Would you be open to writing a memoir?" I stared at the screen for a long moment, my heart racing. Me? Write a book? I'd spent so long telling other women's stories, guiding, mentoring, listening, that I'd never stopped to think about putting my own on paper. But something in me whispered, "It's time." That night, as I told Jordan about the offer over dinner, his eyes lit up like the first time he saw me on stage at our first Women's Summit. "You have to do it," he said. "It feels scary," I admitted, "to open up that much again." "Maya," he said gently, "you've already lived through it. Now you just have to tell it." He was right. So I said yes. The months that followed were a blur of late-night writing sessions, interviews, and revisiting memories I thought I'd buried forever. Some nights, I'd be typing by candlelight while rain hit the window, tears slipping down my cheeks as I relived the woman I used to be, fragile, afraid, lost. But the deeper I went, the more powerful I felt, because I realized every wound I once hated had become the proof of my survival. The title came to me one evening while watching the sunset from our porch. Unbroken, the story of a woman who refused to stay silent. When the book finally launched 6 months later, the response was overwhelming. Women lined up for hours at Barnes & Noble, clutching copies, some crying before they even reached the signing table. They didn't come to meet a celebrity. They came to meet someone who had lived their story and survived it. One woman, a nurse from Detroit, hugged me tightly and whispered, "I was going to walk away from everything last year. Then I found your story on YouTube. You saved me." I held her for a moment longer, feeling the weight of her words. And that's when I realized my pain had become someone else's lifeline. Meanwhile, Coleman Tech had begun to crumble quietly behind the scenes. The company that once stood as a symbol of power and precision was now facing lawsuits, layoffs, and scandal. Whispers started circulating through Atlanta's corporate circles. Whispers about mismanagement, corruption, and leadership failure. Darius's empire was falling apart. Ironically, I only knew because his company was mentioned in a financial article I was interviewed for. The journalist had laughed lightly and said, "You used to be married to him, right? Life really does come full circle." All I did was smile. Because karma doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks quietly, dressed as divine timing. Weeks later, I received a message request on Instagram. It was from Darius. "Congratulations on the book, Maya. I've been following your work. You've become something remarkable. I'm proud of you." I stared at the message for a long time. Old me would have felt emotional, nostalgic, maybe even tempted to reply. But healed me just smiled, typed a simple response, Thank you. Wishing you peace. And hit send. That was it. No resentment, no bitterness, just closure, finally sealed in grace. Around that same time, Jordan and I were preparing for something even more beautiful, our baby girl. When I found out I was pregnant, I cried so hard I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from a soul that's been through fire and finally found joy. During my 3rd trimester, we moved into a new home in Buckhead, warm, filled with sunlight, plants, and art. One afternoon, as I sat in the nursery painting tiny gold stars on the ceiling, Jordan walked in holding a cup of tea. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think God gave me you so I could heal you, but now I see. He gave me you so I could learn what real love looks like." Tears rolled down my cheeks as I whispered, "And he gave me you to remind me that love doesn't hurt, not when it's real." Our daughter, Zoe Grace, was born on a quiet Sunday morning, right as the sun rose over Atlanta. She had Jordan's eyes and my dimples, and when the nurse placed her in my arms, everything in the world went still. In that moment, I realized something powerful. I wasn't just raising a child, I was raising a legacy, a living reminder that broken women don't stay broken forever. A year later, I stood on stage at the Phoenix Gala, an event that now drew thousands of women from across the country. The lights dimmed, the music softened, and as I looked out at the sea of faces, mothers, daughters, friends, survivors, I felt tears well up. "A few years ago," I began, "I was standing in a small apartment crying over a man who didn't see my worth. Today I stand before you, not as his ex-wife, but as a woman who found herself after losing everything." The crowd cheered. "If you're watching this," I continued, "and you're in your dark season, please hear me. You are not unworthy. You are not too late, and you are not too broken. You are becoming." The room erupted in applause. Jordan stood backstage, holding Zoe, pride shining in his eyes, and in that moment I knew this was the rise I had prayed for. Not revenge, not recognition, but redemption. That night, as the event ended, I walked outside into the cool Atlanta air. The city lights shimmered like diamonds against the night sky. I tilted my head back, closed my eyes, and smiled. Because after all the heartbreak, all the tears, and all the lessons, I had finally risen from the ashes. Not as someone's ex, not as someone's success story, but as Maya Matthews, whole, healed, and finally free. I used to think healing meant never looking back, but life has a way of bringing your past full circle, not to punish you, but to prove how far you've come. It happened one gray Thursday morning. Rain tapped gently against my office window as I sipped coffee and reviewed the quarterly reports for the Phoenix Foundation. Jordan was on a business trip in Chicago, Zoe was at daycare, and I was lost in thought, content, steady, at peace. Then my assistant, Kendra, stepped into my office with a hesitant look. "Mrs. Matthews," she said, "there's someone here asking to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." I looked up. "Who is it?" She hesitated, then said softly, "Darius Coleman." For a moment I couldn't breathe. It had been almost 4 years since the last time I'd seen him, and though time had dulled the pain, hearing his name out loud still stirred something deep. Not love, not hate, just memory. "Send him in," I said quietly. When he walked through that door, I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the confident man who used to fill every room with his presence. The man standing before me now looked older, not in years, but in spirit. His once perfect suit hung loosely on his frame. His shoulders were heavy, his eyes tired. "Maya," he breathed, almost like a confession. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt like 1,000 unsaid things. Apologies, regrets, old ghosts. He looked around my office, the awards on the shelves, the photo of Jordan and Zoe on my desk, and gave a sad smile. "You built quite a life for yourself." "I did," I said simply. He sat down across from me, fidgeting with his hands like a man holding something fragile. "I've been following your work," he said. "The foundation, the book, all of it. You're doing incredible things." "Thank you," I replied. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening with something that looked like both pride and pain. "I guess I just wanted to see for myself that you were really okay." I tilted my head. "Why now, Darius?" He sighed, a sound that came from somewhere deep in his chest. "Because everything I thought mattered doesn't anymore. The company's gone. The board forced me out last month. My marriage ended 2 years ago. I'm starting over." He laughed bitterly. "Starting over at 41. Life's funny, isn't it?" I studied him for a long time. This man, the one who once told me I was a burden, now looked like he'd been carrying the weight of a lifetime. "Do you ever think," he said softly, "that if I'd been different, things might have turned out differently for us?" I leaned back, watching the rain streak down the glass. "I used to," I admitted. "I used to wonder what I could have done to make you stay, what I could have fixed. But the truth is, we both had to break to find ourselves." He swallowed hard. "Maya, I was angry back then. I didn't know how to handle failure, and you were the one person I took it out on. You didn't deserve that." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For years, I'd imagined what it would sound like, his apology. And now that it was here, it didn't bring tears. It brought peace. "I forgive you, Darius," I said gently. He looked up sharply as if he didn't believe me. "I really do, because forgiveness isn't about you anymore. It's about me finally letting the past rest." He nodded, eyes glassy. "I'm glad you found someone who treated you right," he murmured. "I see him on TV sometimes. He's a good man." "He is," I said with a smile. "But I had to become the right woman to meet him. That's the part you never saw." He lowered his gaze, tears forming. "I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." "No," I corrected softly. "You lost the woman you didn't value when you had her. There's a difference." He nodded slowly, taking it in. After a long silence, he stood to leave. "I won't take any more of your time," he said, voice low. "I just needed to say sorry. Properly, this time." As he reached for the door, I said quietly, "Darius." He turned. "Don't let guilt become your new prison. You can't rewrite the past, but you can still build a better story from here." He gave a faint, grateful smile. "You always did have the last word." I chuckled softly. "Guess that hasn't changed." And just like that, he walked out of my life. This time, not with anger or silence, but with closure. That night, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and lavender. Jordan joined me, wrapping his arm around my shoulder. "How was your day?" he asked. I hesitated for a moment, then said, "Peaceful," in ways I didn't expect. He studied my face for a beat, then nodded knowingly. "You saw him, didn't you?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah, and I forgave him." Jordan pressed a kiss to my forehead. "That's my girl." I leaned against him, exhaling deeply. For the first time in years, there were no ghosts, no bitterness, no lingering ache, just peace. In the weeks that followed, something inside me shifted. I stopped checking on what used to be and started dreaming about what could be. Zoe was growing fast, curious, brilliant, fearless. She'd sit in my office during weekends, doodling on my old journals, saying things like, "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to help people too." And every time she said that, I'd smile, because that's how healing echoes through generations. Darius's chapter in my story had ended, but my book, my real story, was still being written. And this time, I was holding the pen. A year after that quiet afternoon with Darius, life found its rhythm again. Soft, steady, and full. The chaos that once lived in my chest had finally turned into peace. Some mornings I'd wake before sunrise just to sit on the porch with my coffee, watching lights spill over the Atlanta skyline. The same city that once held my heartbreak now held my healing. Jordan would join me a few minutes later, still half asleep, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders. And we'd sit there in silence, not the heavy kind that once filled my life, but the kind that feels safe. Sometimes he'd reach over, squeeze my hand, and say, "You know, I thank God every day for your second chance, not just at love, but at life." And I'd smile, because he was right. My second chance wasn't just about finding Jordan, it was about finding me. Months later, something unexpected happened. The Phoenix Foundation was nominated for a National Humanitarian Award. When I started it 2 years ago, I just wanted to help women rebuild their lives after divorce, abuse, or loss. I didn't think it would grow this much, or touch so many people. On the night of the award ceremony, I stood backstage, palms sweaty, heart thudding. The audience was full of faces, some familiar, others strangers, but all there to celebrate resilience. When my name was called, I took a deep breath and walked up to the stage. Under the soft lights, memories flashed before me. That tiny apartment, those tear-stained journals, the woman who once doubted her worth. I took the microphone and smiled. There was a time, I began, when I thought my story had ended, when I believed the pain was the final chapter. But the truth is, every ending is just the beginning of something new. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. I stand here not as someone who had it easy, but as someone who decided that heartbreak would not have the last word. I built this foundation because I wanted women like me, the broken, the forgotten, the underestimated, to know that they can rise again. As I spoke, my eyes drifted toward the audience, and there, near the back, I saw a familiar face. Darius. He wasn't there to interrupt or reclaim anything. He just watched quietly, smiling, proud, peaceful, maybe even healed in his own way. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to look away. I smiled back. Small, kind, final. Because sometimes closure doesn't need words, just acknowledgement. After the ceremony, Jordan found me backstage, grinning ear to ear, trophy in hand. Zoe ran straight into my arms, shouting, "Mommy, you won!" I laughed through tears, holding her tight. That little girl had seen me cry, rebuild, love again. She was growing up knowing what strength looked like in real time. Later that night, when the lights had dimmed and the city outside had gone quiet, I found myself sitting at my desk, the same one where I'd once written in pain. Now I was writing something new, the first chapter of a book titled The Light After the Storm, not a story about heartbreak, but about becoming. To every woman who ever thought she'd never smile again, I wrote, you will. One day you'll wake up and realize the storm didn't destroy you. It shaped you. You are not what happened to you. You are what you chose to become after it. I closed the journal, tears slipping down my cheeks. Not of sadness, but of gratitude. A few months later, the Phoenix Foundation hosted its annual gala. It was held in the same hotel ballroom where Jordan and I first met at that charity event years ago. As I stood at the entrance, greeting guests, I spotted a young woman standing alone, near the back, nervous. Eyes red like she'd been crying. I walked over to her. "First time here?" I asked softly. She nodded. "Yeah, I just left my marriage last month. I don't even know who I am anymore." I smiled gently, recognizing that ache instantly. "Then you're in the right place," I said, "because that's exactly where your healing begins." Her eyes filled with tears. "You really think I can start over?" I touched her hand and said, "I don't just think it, I know it." Because I did. And in that moment, I realized this was it. This was the reason for everything I'd been through. The pain, the loss, the nights I cried myself to sleep. It all led me here, to help someone else find their way back to the light. That night, as I danced with Jordan under the soft glow of the chandeliers, I caught my reflection in the mirror across the room. I didn't see the broken woman anymore. I saw becoming. I saw love, strength, and peace woven into the same soul that once begged to be whole again. Jordan leaned close and whispered, "You know, Maya, I think this is what forever looks like." I smiled, resting my head against his chest. "Yeah," I whispered, "this time it finally does." As the music played, the world outside melted into a quiet hum, the kind of peace that only comes after surviving the storm, because some stories don't end with heartbreak. They end with healing, and they begin again, stronger, softer, braver. So that's my story. The story of how I lost myself trying to be everything for someone who never really saw me, and how I found my way back home, to me. It wasn't a straight path. There were nights I cried until my pillow was soaked. Mornings I woke up numb. Days I questioned whether I'd ever feel whole again. But healing isn't about forgetting what broke you. It's about remembering who you were before you forgot your own worth. And somewhere between the heartbreak and the healing, I found that woman again. She was bruised, yes, but she was still here, still standing, still capable of love. I used to think closure came from someone saying, "I'm sorry," but it doesn't. Closure comes the day you stop waiting for that apology, the day you decide your peace matters more than your pain. Now, when I think about Darius, I don't feel anger anymore. I just feel gratitude. Because he taught me what love isn't. And that's what led me to discover what love truly is. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that some endings aren't meant to destroy you. They're meant to rebuild you. And if you're listening to this still holding on to someone who let you go, I hope you know this. You're going to be okay. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But one day you'll wake up and realize you survived the very thing that was meant to break you. You'll smile again. You'll love again. And when you do, it'll be softer, kinder, wiser. Because that's what healing does. It doesn't erase the story. It just helps you turn the page. My name is Maya Matthews, and this was my story. If this story touched your heart or made you smile, tell us what you think in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts and what you learned from Maya's journey. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right now, because we share powerful, heartwarming stories like this every single day. Don't forget to tap the notification bell so you'll be the first to know whenever a new story drops. Thanks for watching. And remember, every story has a heartbeat.